Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today, friend in life, man who is still working around the clock as final cutdowns come in ahead of the biggest draft weekend of the entire year, none other than John Paulson. John, are you surviving?
I'm surviving. This is the weird confluence of week one and the end of draft season, and it's just you're trying to keep multiple sets of rankings updated. But, if this is the worst thing I could complain about with my job, then it's okay. Everything's okay.
Very, very Tony Romo of you. And, of course, joining us on the show, the guest of honor, Yahoo's own, the great friend in life as well, Andy Behrens, who I just saw last night for our own Chicago Superflex League.
It is a pleasure to be here. There are some guys that I was going to talk about today if I'd landed them in last night's draft, and a couple I did not. So I feel like I don't know if you're going to end up discussing them, John, but I feel like you won the honor of talking about certain players because I didn't reach far enough. I didn't reach aggressively enough.
One of those sicko leagues, by the way, Paulson, that is Superflex, three wide receivers, and 2 flex. So literally our job is to find living bodies. We just need players out there who are going to be on the field. I'll be starting Allen Lazard. And I know a lot of people are in those kind of leagues where you're just trying to find bodies. So it's always fun to talk about. And Jonathan Taylor went in the 8th round of that type of league last night. And that's where I want to begin because a lot of people with drafts coming up have to know where to gauge his value now that he's guaranteed to be on the PUP list and miss the first 4 games of the season. And we don't know beyond that. We're working with a very wild timeline right now since he apparently won't put pen to paper due to his grievances with Jim Irsay and the Colts organization. So, Paulson, let's start with 12-team leagues. How are you adjusting for where Jonathan Taylor should be drafted? Because I've seen him go last night in the high-stakes $2,000 leagues. He got drafted mid-7th.
Yeah, and before I get into that, I just would like to acknowledge that Andy Behrens is one of the nicest fantasy analysts in the industry. He was the first analyst that I met in person at FSWA at that time, or whatever it was back in Vegas. Always FSTA. You're the president of FSWA, right? Or you were?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I always love having him on the podcast. And now this is the second time we're doing the My Guys episode with him, so I think it's become an annual thing. So I just wanted to get that out. We went through the pleasantries really quickly. I just want to, every time Andy's on, I gotta acknowledge that he made me feel so comfortable at that conference and really appreciate it. Great guy. Jonathan Taylor. So this news broke.
Another great guy.
This news broke yesterday. I was like, what? And I think a lot of the industry was like, what is going on here? He's not traded. He's being put on PUP. Is he injured? Is he not injured? He is obviously disgruntled with his contract. Now the Packers were apparently involved in a trade possibility with him, but the Colts are asking so much, apparently asking for Jalen Waddle from the Dolphins, just not going to happen. So I don't know how this ends. I basically cranked his expected games down to 8.5, just expecting him to play half a season. That's putting him at RB 30. He's going to be a do not draft pretty much unless he starts to fall into the 7th, 8th round, and you start looking at him after the Alvin Kamara's are off the board, the Khalil Herberts are off the board, guys that can actually help you for the first half of the season. And, talking to Connor Allen yesterday, one of my managers for our FFPC team, we were just discussing when would we draft him? And I think in a big tournament like that, like the main event, he has more value because he might be able to help you in a championship round, and you might be able to get him later. But I think in a regular 12-team, 10-team redraft league, I would just rather give this headache to somebody else, and maybe it works out for them, but more power to them if it does. But I don't want it on my roster.
And that's the problem, Andy, is that he's not going to hit waivers, right? He's not in that dire of a situation, but it is very dire. So where are you pulling the trigger at?
Yeah, it's I think you were smart to frame this in terms of, what would you do in a 12-team league? Because if I'm in, the sort of league that most fantasy players are actually in, maybe not your audience, but most fantasy players actually play as is like a workplace 8 or 10 team league, you can do no wrong there, right? You can take him wherever, because replacement value in the league is so high, you're still going to be able to fill running back. It's fine. So you can be a little bit more aggressive there and think about sort of long range. Where is he, and is he fully healthy in like November, December, and it's fine. Like you're in a league like we were drafting last night, where it's many flexes, many spots to fill, 12 teams, 14 teams beyond that. I'm pretty with John. Like you have to, I think 8 games is kind of the right assumption here, because we also like, it's not the fact that he's definitely out for 4 games does not mean that we're getting 13 games this year, right? Like there's still some ambiguity about like, is he hurt? Is he not hurt? What happens after those 4 games if he hasn't been moved? So I would not assume you're getting a dozen. You're getting like a dozen games, 13 games, something like that. 8 feels right, and then you have to go from there. I've got him, because we have to assign him a fixed rank, I've got him like RB 26, something like that right now. But I can tell you that he's going to be one of those guys again. I'm with Paulson on this. Like his name's going to be up next in queue, and I'm probably going to veer to another position, because it's not a headache that I want in a league where, I can't just find, really good starters on the waiver wire each week. I do agree that in like a larger contest, something like that, maybe you pull the trigger because you're really only thinking upside all the time and you're thinking end of season. But I don't know. For me, I'm probably not comfortable until like, I don't know, round 9. I'll never get him in round 9 because somebody's going to be more aggressive than that.
And the high stakes league I mentioned was thousands of teams, $1 million up top, that top heavy payout you talked about. It's also the fact that I would be more concerned about missing on him if he were to get traded, but it really doesn't seem like that's going to happen, since the offers from Irsay are just unreachable. They're just not palatable for another organization. And so if that's the case, and we're even talking about him coming back after this 4-game absence and playing the rest of the year, you then have to mix in the red flags that happen. Still playing with a rookie quarterback, still playing with a rookie mobile quarterback. And then what is this offense going to be? Probably lots of RPOs, given Shane Steichen ran a top 2 rate of RPOs the last 2 years with Philadelphia. But there are also reports that Steichen's been pulling from collegiate and high school playbooks, since he has a raw Superman under center, and then of course Jonathan Taylor. So we don't know. It could go back to like the SMU days of just bringing back the what's the word I'm looking for, Barons? As a
wishbone.
Wishbone. Yeah. It could be something like that. Like, we don't know what this offense is going to be, but I bet it does not involve Jonathan Taylor having high target equity. So I don't know what his ceiling is this year. And so you combine all of that into a pot and say, maybe this guy is honestly in that type of format, like a 9th round player. And that just still seems wild to say out loud. Andy.
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy to be talking that way, because he was, not that long ago, he was plausibly a first half of the first round sort of player. I do think you're right to also speak to some of the headwinds that he was facing even in a normal year.
Yes.
Because of the Richardson situation, right? Like, and we're so far past that, because there have been so many other news and notes on the Jonathan Taylor player page. So, over the last month or so. But there was a time when we were raising reasonable concerns over, does this sort of change the touchdown projection for Jonathan Taylor? Because obviously that's going to be like Anthony Richardson is going to be a huge part of the goal line offense, right? Like that was already a concern. How many receptions could we reasonably expect for Taylor in this environment? So there were already some concerns here, and now on top of it, again, you have to project roughly half a season. And then I don't know, is he happy when he comes back? Where is he when he comes back? Sometimes uncertainty can be like a good thing. You're right. He could get traded to a rich environment, and then we're kicking ourselves because we don't have him. But that's just not, again, especially in a league where I've got to carry the guy for like, a month, 2 months before I get anything out of it. That's just not something I'm generally open to.
And I would just add that I just wanted to add one thing. He's a free agent 2024, so we better brush up on our contract tolling language and all this. Look at the CBA and figure this all out, because, looking at the reported trade requests it does not appear that they're going to, drop quickly enough to actually facilitate a trade unless the Colts just decide they want to be rid of him. But I think the most likely outcome here is he's going to report at some point just to get his year of service in so that he can be a free agent next year.
Two more quick things before we get out of here and move on to our favorite players, because this is a key factor happening in drafts right now that everyone needs to discuss. Paulson, what names are you putting Taylor around now? For instance, Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson are leading off the 9th round in 12-team leagues. Do you have Taylor in that range?
Yeah, he's at RB30, so he's behind Pacheco, Javonte Williams. He's just ahead of A.J. Dillon. I have DeAndre Swift down there because I'm not sure what's going on with this Philly backfield. This might even be a little too high. I just basically projected him for half a season, and this is where he landed. Brian Robinson, Dalvin Cook are down there as well.
And then, Andy, everyone has an opportunity to take a last-round shot on a guy. Last night in our Superflex League, I took Evan Hull. Hull, of course, a 93rd percentile athlete who had a 97th percentile target share in college. My kind of players I want to take just shots on, 17.3% at Northwestern, where your daughter's running at. And Zach Moss, of course, battling this hand injury that makes him questionable, doubtful for week 1. So we think we have a path here for either Deion Jackson, Evan Hull, or maybe Kareem Hunt, who, remember, ditched his own workout with New Orleans just to fly to Indianapolis to work out for them. I'm assuming because they dangled some kind of contract offer in front of him. If he passed his workout, he still does not have a contract, though, as we speak. So what are the shots you're taking in the last round for everyone?
Yeah, I think I think Hall obviously was a good play, and he's probably the most interesting player that is currently in the building for that team. But the messy thing there, and hey, you're taking a final round shot on him, so it's no big deal if you end up dropping Evan Hall. It's totally fine. But I do think Kareem Hunt seems like, I mean, there's still a little bit of musical chairs going on, right? We just had a bunch of players cut. We've still got Fournette and Hunt lurking out there. So somebody's going to land in Indianapolis, and then it's gonna probably bring an abrupt end to the Evan Hull frenzy. But right now he's, of course, he's one of the most added players in Yahoo. So is Hunt, by the way, like just speculatively. And they should be, like, those are the two guys that I would be focused on. I don't know. I just feel like I've done the Zach Moss thing before. I know what it looks like, and I don't need to sign up for that again. It's a little, if we're just sort of wishing on someone who could actually break out, it's probably not Moss. It's more likely Hull.
Anytime you can get 20 carries for 42 yards on your roster, you got to do it. All right, Paulson, I will allow you to lead off. We are each going to go one player we are definitely drafting at every position, beginning with quarterbacks.
All right. Well, I don't think this is going to be any surprise. I like the late round quarterback approach this year with Geno Smith. For some reason, he's the QB 16 off the board. He was QB 6 last year. He was actually QB 5 in leagues where you get 20 points or 1 point for every 20 yards passing, or 6-point pass touchdowns. So if you're in one of those leagues, you want to prioritize him a little bit earlier. 4,200 plus yards, 30 touchdowns. He's a sneaky runner, 366 yards rushing and a touchdown. Led the league in completion percentage, 9th in passing grade at PFF, 10th in passing grade under pressure at PFF. 4th and highest adjusted completion rate on deep passes at PFF. So I think everybody's worried. He was not a great rookie. He did not have a good early start to his career. So they think this is maybe just a flash in the pan. And Derek Klassen of Reception Perceptions doing all the quarterback profiles over there, the excellent profiles. He said, quote, Smith's revival won't be a flash in the pan. They have a great duo and Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and they added the top consensus rookie wide receiver in the draft, who's a little dinged up right now, but should be back. Looks like he'll be back in September. I just don't understand this QB 16 ADP.
I don't think it's a hot take, Andy, but I also take Geno over Daniel Jones. We've talked about it all offseason, how add Tua, Dak, Kirk, Jared Goff to that mix too. They're all the same player. So it's like the same tier, but I do have a lot more confidence in Geno Smith's outlook, since we are basically taking Noah Fant's targets away and giving them to Jackson freaking Smith and Jigba over Daniel Jones, but both good options.
Yeah, Geno's a really good name for this list, obviously, and he was under consideration for me. I went to like my own portfolio. Do you want my guy? Do you want my guy right now, or do you want random thoughts
unless you
on
would
Geno?
like to have a soliloquy on Geno, it's up to you.
Well, I just like hat tip to the Geno call, because again, like in Yahoo leagues, he was a QB5 last year, and it's rare that you see this kind of separation. I will also say about Geno that like, if anybody thinks that last year was just like a hot streak or something like that, man, he didn't miss very many games. I mean, he was just good. Like he was an eye test guy last year, like aggressive downfield throws that worked. Like he was just great last year, start to finish. And there wasn't anything that felt particularly.
His throw to Tyler Lockett against the Saints was, I think, the best throw in the entire NFL season. Well, PJ Walker may have something to say about that to DJ Moore, but that double coverage of Tyler Lockett was the best throw of the year. It was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And that, like, he was doing that basically all year. It's not like his season was really buoyed by like, 2 or 3 spike weeks or anything like that. He just passed the eye test all the time. My guy here, based on just my own fantasy portfolio, it's going to be Trevor Lawrence. He is for me, I think, the one guy who has a pretty clear chance to finish top 3 at the position, who you don't actually need to take like rounds 3, rounds 4, round 5, where I'm not always totally happy to take a quarterback. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes he goes pretty high in a draft. Sometimes there's somebody else who's super bullish on him. But whenever I can see him fall to like round 6, round 7, I'm super interested, and I've gotten Lawrence. Obviously, he gets the massive addition in Calvin Ridley this year. Ridley not yet really past his expiration date at all. He already has wide receiver 1 credentials in fantasy. He's looked pretty good this summer. The receiving core at worst is really good. It's possibly great. This is a team that has, I always like these teams that have just year-to-year continuity, except they've made a couple of obvious upgrades, and that's basically what we have with the Jacksonville offense. So I don't think it's very difficult to imagine like a 4,800-yard passing season, perhaps a 5,000-yard passing season from Lawrence. And then there's my favorite thing about him, which, and I don't know that this will be unlocked. It probably won't, but Trevor Lawrence definitely has untapped rushing upside. Probably the team isn't going to let him do it, because why are we going to risk 80 or 90 hits on Trevor Lawrence? I totally get it. I'll just say that some of Trevor Lawrence's best moments as a collegiate quarterback were actually on the ground. We're in the run game. He has been terrific in the NFL on the rare occasions when the Jaguars are like, nothing is working in the passing game, or we're in a monsoon like the Jets game last year, and they let him run, and he's great. Like, he's really good at this. So if they did allow him to run the ball 70, 80 times, which again, probably not happening, he would definitely give us 450 yards and like 5 or 6 touchdowns, because it is very much in his skill set. And it's sort of that one thing where if it actually happened, now we're talking about a plausible QB1.
And Paulson, Andy mentioned untapped rushing side. I actually want to add untapped passing ceiling as well, because he was only 20th and his rate of targets 20 yards downfield last year. And now we get Calvin Ridley, who the last time we saw him, short sample with the Falcons, led the league in targets 20 yards downfield. So we think we have someone who can separate. We also saw that in the preseason on a handful of throws, including that amazing back shoulder fade that he turned around and fell down into the end zone with along the sideline. So I think we have more rushing upside and more passing upside to get there with Lawrence this year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Calvin Ridley is the Calvin Ridley that we knew a few years ago, because he was an excellent separator, excellent route runner, and he could sort of have the impact that A.J. Brown or Stephon Diggs had on their quarterbacks when those players joined those teams. And he's the 8th guy going typically in drafts, and he's the last of the 8 that everybody kind of deems as, surefire. Like, I think almost all of us have the same 8 quarterbacks ranked 1 through 8, just to mix, you might mix them up a little bit. So, I think we did have Evan Silva on, and he said that Deshaun Watson was ahead of Trevor Lawrence. And I almost did a spit take. If I would have had any coffee in my mouth, I might've done a spit take. All due respect to Evan. I agree. I mean, there's untapped potential in both. And, he ran for 291 and 5 touchdowns last year. So he already has a good rushing floor, especially around the goal line, to get those 5 touchdowns. So I I do have him in a couple leagues, and I did get him in the big dog over at Underdog because he slipped a little bit past ADP, and he has a tendency to, if you have 5 or 6 managers in your league that are wanting to go late round quarterback, and all of a sudden the Trevor Lawrence is falling around past ADP, I think it's a great time to pounce.
You mentioned Deshaun Watson, and that's where we're going for my pick because I have him in the same tier as Trevor Lawrence. And I get Watson a lot because I consider tiers flat, right? That's why we draft from tiers, is because we're trying to draft from the bottom of them and get the best value and not be the one to make a mistake when we consider players all the same in that tier. And obviously, for recency bias, Deshaun Watson is being left behind a lot of different quarterbacks when, again, I consider him just neck and neck with Trevor Lawrence. Coming from a poker and DFS background, there are just so many situations where I say, keep following the process, hold your nose. Eventually, the results will be easy, and they just come with time. And so I look and I see career averages with the Texans, 8.3 yards per attempt, to last year with the Browns for Watson, 6.5 yards per attempt. A career 5.9% touchdown rate, and then with the Browns, a career low 4.1% touchdown rate. And also, the first time in his career, Watson averaged less than 20 fantasy points per game, 14.3. Just extreme differences that I say, this obviously can't happen again. He can't be that bad again. Browns also increased their pass play rate from 3 wide sets to top 10 rate, 76% when Watson got under center compared to 16th league average whenever Jacoby Brissett was their quarterback. So overall, I'm still targeting Deshaun Watson in Superflex leagues in the 3rd, 4th round in the same tier as Lawrence. And then in one quarterback leagues, you will usually see Tua, Dak, Kirk Cousins go ahead of him. And I think that's insanity. So I will, I guess, put my name on Deshaun Watson for better or worse and still hope he gets cut in week 2. Any thoughts on Watson, Andy?
He's the last guy on the list that I could really make a case for finishing as the overall QB1, right? So like that I think is the real justification there. Like I think it's more likely with Lawrence, but there's a separation between those two in terms of ADP. It's a little, we play fantasy to have fun and we should like our team, so it's a little icky to look at Watson on a roster. But there's just no question that the last time we saw this guy coming off of a normal offseason, we're only a couple years removed from him like leading the league in passing yards and leading the league in a whole bunch of stuff that we really, really care about. He's not old. He's traveled a weird road over the last couple of years, but there's no age concern here. The team around him is really fun. Obviously, you've got Nick Chubb, a player with incredible gravity who shifts things a little bit, and then you've got a pretty good receiving core there. We know that we have. I talked about the possibility of some untapped rushing upside with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, we know it's going to be there with Deshaun Watson, right? Like he'd already settled into 450, 500 yards a year, 5 touchdowns, something like that. So you can just put that in the bank. So yeah, I think he is. Most of us have him like somewhere in the QB8 to QB10 range. I think he's the last guy on the list who could actually be the number 1 overall.
With 6 carries per game last year in those starts, I have never been more confident in a player I hope fails. Paulson, let's begin with you at running back.
Yeah, I would just mention that I have Watson at QB 15, so I'm extremely low on him. I'm just kind of scrolling through the reports. I did see a negative report about just how the passing, but it was a while ago, so maybe he's starting to get back into the swing of things. He definitely does have top 5% potential. I'll grant you that. To my guy for running back, again, this probably won't surprise anyone. I'm going to go with Aaron Jones, and this is not a homer pick. I often am pessimistic about the Packers and their prospects, but I don't understand his ADP either, just like I don't understand Geno Smith's ADP. He's creeped up a little bit because we've had some attrition at the position. Breece Hall has fallen out of the top 12 or 15, but he's RB 15 off the board right now. He finished RB 9 in each of the last 2 seasons, 28 years old. Offense was mediocre last year, so it wasn't like Aaron Rodgers was, leading this amazing offense, and Aaron Jones was the RB 9 from that. They were kind of mediocre. Rodgers was ineffective, inefficient, and Jones finished RB 9. He still delivered top 10 numbers. I think the offense will be a little bit more run heavy this year. I think he'll be the centerpiece of it. He's a threat for 70 catches. He was 7th in yards after contact per attempt, 15th in broken tackles per attempt, 3rd in PFF rushing grade. And over the last 2 seasons, he has the 5th most receptions, the 6th most receiving yards, and the 2nd most receiving touchdowns at his position. I just think he's a rock solid pick. He's been going in the 4th, 5th round as people are going wide receiver heavy at the start of drafts. I'd be happy with him as my RB1 if I went wide receiver heavy to start.
Thoughts on the Packers backfield, Andy?
Yeah, listen, I think John nailed this, and I had a list of a couple of different candidates that I could talk about at running back, and Aaron Jones is one of them. I think his ADP is kind of wild because he never finishes this low, right? Like you're getting him at a cost where he just in a healthy season he's going to beat it. We know it because he's done it repeatedly over multiple years. He's the exact sort of player who should just be the best friend for a young quarterback who's trying to establish himself. I mean, and John nails it too. Like it wouldn't be the least bit surprising if Aaron Jones catches 65 balls this year. He's a brilliant receiver. Still, maybe it's the back edge of his prime, but he's still in his prime. I think his ADP is absolutely crazy. I think he's a screaming value.
The Packers at least have funneled a top 10 rate of targets to their backfield in 3 of the last 4 years. So that's been pretty consistent under Matt LaFleur. Also, the Packers have the easiest projected passing schedule. So certainly something else that helps out Aaron Jones. What about your running back, Andy?
Yeah, the running back I'll go with here, and there's a couple guys that I've really been collecting, and I'm gonna go with Dameon Pierce, and he's got some recent helium in the ADP. So I don't know where he's gonna settle, like when we're actually when everybody's drafting leagues like over Labor Day and stuff like that. But I still feel where he's going now, he can really smash and just be a filthy steal. He obviously, people know some of the under the hood numbers on Dameon Pierce, right? But I'll go through a few of them. Like he missed the final 4 games of his rookie season, still finished 4th among all backs in missed tackles on his rush attempts. I just thought he was a thrilling runner to watch. And I will also say that I have a weakness for this style. And maybe it's the fact that I was brought up on like Walter Payton or whatever, but like I love these guys who want to end every run with extreme violence. I was a Marion Barber guy back in the day, and Pierce has got a lot of that. I love these guys who just look for somebody to hit at the end of a run. Obviously, there's a lot of new stuff in Houston. Much of it is promising, but we should probably not expect everything to fit together perfectly, at least not immediately. But man, I think this running game can be really good right away. He was Pierce, again, despite all those missed games, he was something like 12th in terms of yards after contact last year. Again, right up there on the missed tackle leaderboard. Super fun to watch. It's not the traditional missed tackle too, by the way. He's not giving us like the Josh Jacobs missed tackle where he just seems to teleport himself someplace else on the field. Like these Pierce missed tackles are like he drags a guy for 5 yards, or he's stiff arming a guy like 6 yards down the field. But man, that style is so fun. I don't know if it's going to have a long lifespan, but it's really fun to watch right now. So I think that the thing I was talking about with Trevor Lawrence, where there's like a skill that I think he can unlock, that thing with Dameon Pierce is obviously going to be, can you be any sort of volume receiver? And he's probably not going to be a 60 catch guy, anything like that. If we can get Dameon Pierce to like 45 receptions, I'm feeling really good. It is dangerous to take like small preseason samples and try to extrapolate them over a full season. I'm not going to totally do that, but I do think it's notable that Pierce has rarely come off the field during the CJ Stroud snaps throughout the preseason. Again, I don't think we can say that that's going to carry over entirely into the regular season. We're clearly going to see other backs on the field, but man, we get Dameon Pierce out there for some third down work, for some passing down work, and we can just get him to 40, 45 catches. He's got a pretty clear chance to finish as like a top 8 fantasy running back.
To put numbers to that preseason context, Paulson, 7 possessions for CJ Stroud, and Pierce played 83% of snaps as essentially an every down back.
Yeah, I moved him up from the 20s, low 20s, up to about 13.5 PPR. in the last 2 weeks or so ahead of some guy. But we've also had some attrition at the position, as I mentioned, but that was one reason for him moving up. But I wrote him up on Twitter on my big thread. He was 4th in yards after contact per attempt, 2nd in broken tackles per attempt, according to StatHead, 12th in PFF rushing grade. And I was concerned heading in with this Devin Singletary signing because Devin Singletary has been pretty good. And there was some concern that, he would eat into Pierce's workload either on early downs or third downs. But as we mentioned, the snaps in the preseason have been super encouraging, and we might see him as a 3-down back. And if we do, he's definitely has RB1 type upside.
I also question your usage of threads. I think you're supposed to start a new thread and you keep on adding to the same one. It's like we told a caveman to write a thread and then you keep on adding notes.
I've been specifically asked by our thread master, Connor Allen, to add 1 post per day to this thread, and I'm doing exactly as instructed.
And you're not frustrated about it at all. You can.
No, I've got. Hey, look, the first tweet on it has 181,000 impressions. So I'm just going to let those numbers speak for themselves, John.
All right. Please send me my impressions check whenever it comes in. I'm sure it's fine. I will stick with Tony Pollard, as I've been harping on all offseason, because he should be a first, second round turn player. And even in 12-team 1-quarterback leagues, for whatever reason, he's not. I think what's happening is Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley are acting as blockers for Tony Pollard's ADP. And that's great because Tony Pollard should be drafted over those players in the back of the first round. First of all, he's already reached his ADP. He was already the RB9 in points per game on only 13.7 touches per game alongside Zeke last year. And when you consider efficiency and usage, top 5 in every season in the league since 2019 and yards after contact per attempt. 3 starts Pollard has made without Zeke in his career. And he averaged at least 21 PPR points in those 3 starts for an RB1, RB7, and RB3 finish. So now we don't have Zeke, and we think those 13.5 touches per game are going to increase dramatically with only Deuce Vaughn and Rico Dowdle behind him. Tony Pollard, honestly can finish as the RB1 overall ahead of Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler. So he's a player that just everyone needs to get higher on and just keep on hammering in the second round since everyone else is letting him fall there, Andy.
Yeah, I love this call in part because Pollard finished as like the RB8, RB9 last year. Mm-hmm. He barely saw red zone work. Like Zeke had all the red zone touches. I think Pollard had like 25, 26, something like that. Zeke was over 40. He doesn't even need to collect all of that work from Zeke. Like if his workload goes up, I don't know, 30 carries, 30, 35. And a lot of it are the most valuable carries in the game. He's just absolutely going to crush. He's a clear candidate to finish as the RB1. This is a really good call.
Yeah, I would add RB. I have him at RB7. I think I exclude week 18 and all my RB whatevers finishes just because week 18 is weird. But he was RB7 last year, and that was with Zeke in the lineup. RB9 on a per game basis, 4th highest run grade. 9th highest receiving grade at PFF, and he was 1st in yards after contact per attempt, 15th in broken tackles per rush attempt. I don't know if you mentioned that, John. I was letting the dog out there for a moment and might have missed your spiel, but Tony Pollard is a great early second round pick. I think he deserves to go in the late first round. And I think, if people complain about this 110, 111, 112 pick, but if you want to go running back heavy, you can grab a Nick Chubb and Tony Pollard at the turn, and you're set in your backfield.
Before we move on to your wide receiver, Paulson, just a reminder to everyone listening, promo code YouTube for 25% off at 4for4 Football. It's already too cheap. It's already a increment amount of money for all season, not just monthly. And the promo code YouTube will get you a quarter, 25% of that off for Paulson's guys and fades, my guys and fades, not to mention projections and rankings every single week, and the first waiver wire column that drops for better or worse on Tuesday morning that I need to get to immediately. So YouTube promo code 25% off at 4for4.com/plans. Paulson, your receiver.
Yeah, I was debating here between Tyler Lockett and Diontae Johnson, but we've talked about Tyler Lockett, I think, on every podcast for like 6 straight podcasts. So I want to.
You can still hammer it home for everyone just to draft him. Make sure they do.
Just draft him, but also draft Diontae Johnson, phenomenal route runner. Success rate versus man over reception perception has been top 7 in each of the last 3 seasons. He had the best open score at ESPN 538, according to their advanced metrics. He had 0 touchdown catches last year on 147 targets, which is really mind-boggling. And the stat that I pulled on that was since the 2010 season, the 50 other receivers who have seen 142 to 152 targets in a single season have averaged 7.26 touchdowns per season. That's the same number you would get if he had just maintained his career 4.9% touchdown rate. He would have caught 7.2 touchdowns. So he's being drafted, I don't know, it's ADP, like wide receiver 32. Maybe it's creeped up a little bit as we've all been pounding the table for him. But he just gets open at will. And I'm starting to buy this, Kenny Pickett might be decent train. Like I'm starting to get on it. Like he might double his passing touchdowns this year from 12 to 24 or something like that. And if that happens, I think he with Diontae Johnson having a whole season now to get on the same page, his yards per attempt to George Pickens were a lot better than his yards per attempt to Diontae Johnson. And that shouldn't really be that way given how well Johnson gets open. So I'm expecting some regression for Johnson in a positive manner. And I think he'll score some touchdowns this year and have, another 140 plus target season.
Johnson is also pretty easy to get, Andy, because in a lot of interfaces, you have to scroll down. Like his default ADP is like wide receiver 35. And so people will feel uncomfortable drafting him as the wide receiver 22 to 24. But in my opinion, that's where he should be going.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. On talent, you mentioned 2 guys. Lockett is definitely one of them. Like Lockett and Johnson are certainly top 20 separators, right? Like Johnson is an absolute immediate separator, really fun to watch. I mean, just a really weird scene in Pittsburgh last year, right? Like a pretty unimaginative offense with a rookie quarterback finding his way. There's no way it's exactly like that again. It is a shocking, absence of touchdowns on that number of targets. And there's no way that happens with a healthy Diontae Johnson. I agree with you. He should be certainly a top 25 fantasy receiver. He's a little bit higher than that at Yahoo, I want to say, if only because Harmon and I have ranked him a little bit more aggressively.
We are betting on Diontae Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, and Kenny Pickett as a sleeper in 2 quarterback superflex leagues, since Pittsburgh's 43% rate of passing touchdowns last year was the 5th lowest mark of the last decade. And the 4 offenses that registered a 43% rate or lower prior to them all averaged an increase of 22.5% the following year. So we just think for historical regression that, yes, naturally, Pittsburgh's passing touchdowns will come up, and everyone wins if that's the case. I'll take it away from here.
I just wanted to mention he's pick 53 at Yahoo, pick 67 in our multi-site ADP. So it sort of depends on the site, but he's now a wide receiver 28 after a couple weeks since that thread was originally posted.
Since the impressions cinched everyone packing to his ADP. Okay, so Diontae Johnson, Tyler Lockett, we are already giving the examples of, for instance, I like, not to pick fights with both of you, but I like Aaron Jones, Dameon Pierce individually. I like Cam Akers individually. But I don't ever see myself in drafts coming away from them because of these wide receivers we're mentioning, because I think they have league-winning ceilings, as opposed to running backs we're trying to squeeze into the top 5 when we question their pass-catching opportunity. And Christian Watson, I'm adding to that list of another reason why I just never veer from the process, because I want these guys instead. Like Christian Watson last year, we saw 8 starts from week 10 on, that primetime Sunday night game against the Cowboys. He had 3 touchdowns and ended lives with Aaron Rodgers, and they took down Dallas. But I thought because of the way he finished the year, he was going to be going around where he should be, around DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel. But he goes 4 to 6 rounds later, and I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. Maybe the ambiguity from Jordan Love and the passing offense, but overall, in his range in the 5th to 7th round, that's when we should be taking players who break fantasy football, who literally win your league. And in the 4 games from week 10 on that he scored a touchdown, Christian Watson averaged 22.7 fantasy points. He literally broke the game and single-handedly beat all your league mates. And that's the kind of player I want in that range. So I will always reach for and go after Christian Watson around wide receiver 20. Also, remember, in that last 8-game stretch, they gave him 4 carries for 61 yards and a touchdown. They were also trying to find new concerted ways to use him. So he reminds me a lot of let's target Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that, okay, you're our best player. We're going to get you the ball however we can. And then he gets there in fantasy that way. Andy.
You know, the thing that comes to mind as you're speaking about him is really the draft range, right? You're talking about him going in somewhere in rounds like 5 through 7. The point I want to make here is that, you know, that's kind of that RB dead zone. And there's, you know, I feel like when we talk about the RB dead zone a little bit, we almost focus too much on the number of running backs who fail from that range instead of the receivers that you are passing on in that range. If you target a running back, right? Because 2 years ago, who was the decisive player in fantasy football? It was Cooper Kupp. That's where he went, right? Like he was going round 4, round 5, round 6.
Same year as Deebo Samuel as well.
Yep. Same year as Deebo. The year before, where was Stephon Diggs going when he was one of the decisive receivers in fantasy football,
6th
right?
round.
Like we were running away from him because, he's tied to Josh Allen now. That's icky. That's not going to work, right? Like we have these, and that's the kind of thing that's going on with Watson right now, a handful of other receivers in that range. Like it is entirely possible that the overall wide receiver 1 doesn't come from the first round or the second round, but instead comes from Justin Jefferson is great. And I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1, but like we've seen it repeatedly where like the key player in the game is a receiver who comes from that range. So really that's why like we're going to take Rachaad White over a receiver that we think can break the game. So I'm certainly with you, at least philosophically.
It's reminiscent of Will Fuller. It is big wins and small losses. Like maybe Will Fuller's injured, but you still win your weeks whenever he plays. Like in this case, it's not injury for Watson. There are probably blips on the radar. Like when he doesn't score touchdowns, does he offer anything else? And in the 4 games from week 10 on that he did not score a touchdown, he was the wide receiver 57 in points per game. So you're starting like a wide receiver 5 or 6. But again, he won your league when he did do well. So big wins, little losses. That's what we target in that dead zone range. And that's who Watson is. Andy, your wide receiver.
Yeah, my guy, I'm trying to stay authentic to the people that I'm actually drafting a lot of. I just drafted him last night. I'm going to go with Jordan Addison. Took him with Daigle in the room. So we've seen it happen. It would be highly unusual if no wide receiver this year gave us like a top 15 or top 20 fantasy finish, right? Like it generally happens. I think that Addison is the strongest candidate. He's a super easy separator, landed in what I would consider a perfect situation opposite Justin Jefferson. Like I think it's good that Jordan Addison didn't necessarily land in a spot where he was going to be counted on to be the unrivaled number 1, a tilt the field sort of receiver, because we know he's not, Addison is not 6'3" and 215 with like 4.3 speed, anything like that. He's not constructed like a superhero. He's not one of these built in a lab sort of guys. He's so smooth, good at the game, in my opinion. That guy's Biletnikoff season at Pitt a couple of years ago, unbelievable. And he made Kenny Pickett so much money. 17 touchdowns, 100 catches, tons of yards, tons of highlights. I just think he's now stepping into an offense, number 1, that has funneled all of the touches to a very small number of players. Adam Thielen ran like the second most routes in the league last year, and we have a real opportunity for Jordan Addison to step right into that. So there's just a ton of vacated opportunities here. I think he's a very good player. I think the ball is going to come his way. Yes, KJ Osborne is also a thing, but Jefferson just makes life so easy. And I think we're looking at 1,000 yards and a pretty healthy reception total from Addison at a minimum. I think he finishes as a wide receiver 2.
And we are basically a year removed from Paulson from seeing Jordan Addison's ceiling, because as Lincoln Riley's one to do, like Addison won the Biletnikoff Award on 70% of his routes from the slot, an elite slot player. And then Lincoln Riley took him and played him on the boundary for 75% of his routes at USC last year, because Lincoln Riley only cares about his system. He does not care about you. Just look at Marvin Mims in his final year. And so like we do have more to unlock here with Addison as the team's clear wide receiver 2.
Yeah, and you can easily transfer 107 targets from Thielen over to Addison. I think that's probably a good estimate to start with. And we've seen this thing before where he's right now he's 3rd on the depth chart behind KJ Osborne. That brings back memories of Justin Jefferson and BC Johnson, I think it was in preseason, keeping Justin Jefferson off the field. I don't think it's going to happen. I agree with. I think this is a great call. He's my top rookie receiver. Right now, I have him at wide receiver 30. I've been drafting a lot of him lately, as some of these receivers have been kind of dropping in this range, and he's been sort of ascending. I like him as a late season big producer. If you can get him as your wide receiver 4, and you don't have to start him necessarily week 1 when he's maybe playing 50% of the snaps, and you can sort of lean on him for the last 2/3, 3/4 of the season. I think that's an ideal situation. And where he's going in drafts, you can get him as your wide receiver 4. So I definitely love this call.
Can y'all hear
I love
me?
to be agreed with.
I can hear you now.
Okay. So moving on to tight end, Andy, I want you to go first, because anyone who's seen any Andy Barron's content all offseason knows exactly the homer pick that's coming.
I mean, there's one right answer. There's one right answer to this question. It's Sam LaPorta. It's obviously Sam LaPorta. It's always been Sam LaPorta. Yeah, I talk about him every week. It's rare that I go on a show and I don't talk about Sam LaPorta. I just want people to understand. Like, you can look at his collegiate numbers and it doesn't seem that impressive, right? Like 650 yards or so over the last couple of years. You need to understand what 650 receiving yards within the context of that Iowa offense means. Like, that's like 1,500 yards in a normal offense. Like, this was a terrible passing environment. And I don't want to like hammer too much like a college quarterback, whatever, but the quarterback play was terrible. The play calling was terrible. The design of the offense was abysmal. And after the catch hero, Sam LaPorta still managed to find his way to like 650 receiving yards. He's so good. He is sort of I don't know. Obviously I've been watching Iowa tight ends for the last 30 years or so. He is very much in the tradition of, George Kittle in his final years, where you could really kind of see it. Obviously Iowa's program spits out NFL ready tight ends year after year after year. There's been plenty of camp buzz here. A clear connection between LaPorta and Jared Goff. The other point that I like to make on the situation in Detroit, Lions tight ends last year actually combined for 12 touchdown receptions, and I don't know that people really thought of it as a position that was really getting fed, because it was like 3 different guys, right? It was Zylstra, and it was Brock Wright, and it was Hawkinson for like half a year. But they fed tight ends at the goal line, and we have a real opportunity right now for LaPorta to just be like the one mouth that gets fed at that position, instead of them distributing the ball to a whole bunch of different people. It sure seems like he's the number 1 guy on the depth chart entering the year. There's a really good chance that he finishes as the number 2 receiver on that team.
Lions tight ends, as you mentioned, collectively led the league in touchdowns once they traded TJ Hawkinson, the rare win-win deal for both sides. Paulson also LaPorta 2.5 yards per route run against man coverage, meaning he's a one-on-one mismatch nightmare from week 1, since he's given all the starting reps, at least in camp and preseason games, and also led this entire class in routes from the boundary, so among tight ends. So we think that he's going to be used in a variety of ways from that hot Thursday night game against the Chiefs on.
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack here with Andy's pick of LaPorta. And it's all complimentary. Don't worry, Andy. It's a bit of a homer pick, but it's obvious. Like, I mean, this is tight end university, right? LaPorta, I have him at tight end 14. He's going like tight end 19 in our multi-site ADP. People are still sleeping on him, and I think it's in large part because we do not generally expect much of anything from rookie tight ends. But this year, we've got at least 4. LaPorta, who I have at 14, Kincaid, I have at 16. Musgrave at 22, and Michael Mayer at 27, who are going very likely to play starter snaps, unless I'm missing something with those 4. LaPorta is joining one of the best passing attacks. They have a bad defense, the Lions. Jared Goff can deliver the ball accurately. We saw that last year. And I just want to mention that George Kittle, when he was asked, I think by Matt Harmon, who are some up and coming tight ends at the position, LaPorta was one of the 3 that he mentioned. I don't know if that was a homer pick by George Kittle, but it's nice to hear George Kittle say, "Oh, this guy's going to be really good." He's already won the tight end one job. It makes a lot of sense that Andy picked him, and I endorse that pick.
Paulson, your favorite tight end this year?
Yeah, some of the other things to unpack with this LaPorta pick is that it is an Iowa homer pick. So I'm going to pick a Wisconsin homer tight end, the Jake Ferguson out of the Cowboys. Going to start for them. He is being slept on because they drafted Luke Schoonmaker, but he kind of missed off-season activities and minicamp due to an injury. He's kind of behind the eight ball. So I think he's one of these rookie tight ends that's going to struggle. He's not going to be able to win the starting job over Ferguson. And Ferguson's playing extremely well. Dak Prescott targeted him 11 times in 2022, which isn't much, but he caught all 11 passes for 103 yards and a touchdown, 9.36 yards per attempt. In the preseason game that he played, he caught all 3 targets for 38 yards. I think could be just as good as Dalton Schultz, and Dalton Schultz turned in the tight end 4 and tight end 10 finishes the last 2 seasons. Dak Prescott was asked about him. He said, quote, "I think he's close to becoming a big time guy. As far as a playmaker, he's already there." I just think, if you're towards the end of your draft, or if you just punt the position and you want to grab a LaPorta or a Ferguson late, or grab both and see who ends up, do an Andy versus John competition on your bench and see which one emerges as the starter, fantasy starter for you faster. Love it. Amongst the tight ends with 20 plus targets, he posted the 9th highest yards per route run, 1.79. That's an indicator of future success. I love grabbing him as my tight end 2 late in drafts, tight end premium especially. If I'm at all worried about my tight end position, I'm going to grab him. I don't mind taking a second tight end if it's Ferguson or even LaPorta in a situation.
The way I usually handle one tight end leagues is drafting one. Even if it's a last round guy, I'm only taking one. I'm not using that roster space for darts on wide receivers and running backs where we have to start multiple of them on a backup onesie position at all. And Andy, I'm curious then, in terms of Jake Ferguson and Sam LaPorta, is that a situation where you were comfortable with taking the one in the very last few rounds and then just starting them week 1?
Yeah, I mean, I've got LaPorta locked into starting lineups all over the place. I think he's going to be a relevant.
You hope so, at least.
Immediately.
Yeah.
I also like I like the 2 guys that we've mentioned so far, because I think a reasonable approach at tight end is Kelsey or Waite, right? Like I don't always do this exactly. Like sometimes a guy falls and I just I end up with a Kittle on my roster. I'm partial to George Kittle, but like the positional edge here is with Travis Kelce, right? Like he's the guy who beat out the overall tight end 2 last year by like 90 fantasy points. He's the guy who doubled up almost every tight end last year. So like if I don't get him, I'm generally looking for Sam LaPorta, and I kind of tilt a little bit if somebody else takes LaPorta, but then I'm also looking at guys like Kincaid, like Ferguson. And I think it's fine to just skip over like the middle 2, 3, 4 tiers at this spot and target some of these guys who go super late, if at all. Because the other thing that we know about the tight end position is like, if you just score like 6 touchdowns and have 600 yards, you're probably going to be like the tight end 6 overall. Like it doesn't take much to find yourself on the leaderboard there. And so far we've talked about 2 guys who can just clearly do that.
Since y'all talked about the late round options, I'll give a different strategy. And you mentioned the positional edge Kelsey gives. And I keep wondering, does Kelsey still have that positional edge since he was only the 9th tight end in the last, since 2008 to average over 15 points per game? It's just something that doesn't happen. And so what if he's just normal? What if he's just Travis Kelce and he's not elite again? We bring him back a little bit, and then we start asking who in the next tier of players can top him. I think it's Mark Andrews. But what if you can't get Mark Andrews since he's now a 2nd or 3rd round turn player? I then skip TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, and Kyle Pitts, and I go straight to Darren Waller because I think we have one more peak year in his age 30 season with Waller. From 2019 to 2021, Darren Waller averaged a 25% target share. That wasn't his issue whatsoever. And then whether it was Devontae Adams joining the team or Josh McDaniels inexplicably only making Waller run go routes from the slot and having him lead all tight ends with a 14.5-yard depth of target, only getting targets downfield. One of those things happened, which obviously sunk Waller to a 16% and meaningless target share last year. But now he's with the Giants, and all reports at a camp, all preseason games, and that he is very clearly being used across the formation, and he is Daniel Jones' favorite target. And so being that age 30, I really only think it's the injury lapse, the 15 missed games the past 2 years that are holding people up. But honestly, I don't think it's a hot take to say Darren Waller outscores T.J. Hawkinson this year, except he's not being drafted as such. So my favorite player in that 5th to 7th round range is Darren Waller still, Andy.
Yeah, I feel like, and it is appropriate and it's smart. I feel like one of the themes of like your guys is you're targeting the last guy in a tier, right? And I think we can make a really strong case that Waller, at least in terms of ADP, is like the last guy in that second tier. I actually think, and credit to Mark Andrews, like Mark Andrews is the one tight end who over the last 7 years has actually finished ahead of Kelsey in any season, right? Like Kelsey has dominated this position over a long period of time. Mark Andrews is the one guy who's actually finished ahead of him, but there's a gap between, and like we almost treat Mark Andrews as if he's a tier of his own after
Absolutely.
Kelsey and before the other guys. And I don't think it should be like that. Like I think he's right. I think he's in that same club with Waller, Hawkinson, and the rest of them, and Waller being the cheapest by far because people, again, fantasy managers have recency bias and they feel burned by a guy in a prior year due to injury, something like that. All Darren Waller has to do is play 14 games, and he is absolutely going to be a top 3 fantasy tight end. That much is pretty clear. He is among the biggest stories in almost any team's camp.
Thoughts on Waller, Paulson?
I like the call. He's like one of the few tight ends that actually has a legit shot, and maybe is probably going to be the highest targeted player on his team. And those are the types of guys that we like to add. I like having a weapon at tight end. So just the Kelsey or bust plan is a little scary to me. I don't have the same confidence in Jake Ferguson as Andy obviously does in Sam LaPorta. And that's admirable. I wish I did have that sort of confidence, but there's a couple other guys I wanted to mention here, and I've been drafting them a little bit lately. Dallas Goedert, somebody posted the split where he was the tight end 3 through the first 10 weeks prior to his injury. Even though he's only working with, I think, 5.6, 5.7 targets per game, he's so highly efficient, and that passing attack is really highly efficient. So I think he's worth looking at if Waller is being bumped up, if Pitts is going ahead of him, maybe you're getting him at tight end 7. I think that's worth a look. And then Pat Freiermuth, Connor Allen got me onto him, averaging 61 yards per game with Kenny Pickett in the 9 games that he played 50% with Pickett at quarterback. He's playing at 1,000-yard pace and is likely going to see some tight end regression as well in a positive manner. So he's one that I think could finish in the top 5 as well. And he's currently going tight end 9 off the board in the 8th round of 12-team leagues.
It's impossible not to find you, Andy. Literally, when people open up their Yahoo drafts to draft with their friends, your face is the first thing that comes up yelling at them. But just in case they're living under a rock, tell everyone where to find the great Andy Behrens.
Obviously you can find me at Yahoo Fantasy. You can find me on Twitter, or the site formerly known as Twitter I'm just at Andy Behrens. Everywhere I go, I'm just at Andy Behrens. I need a more fun moniker. I need some underscores, something, but it's just at Andy Behrens. I'll almost never tweet serious analysis, right? I'm just on Twitter for the jokes, but please follow me there, and check us out at Yahoo Fantasy.
Paulson, what else do you have for everyone in the final stretch coming up this weekend on the site?
Well, I think I need to write an article about the late breaking news, how to deal with some of these late situations, because ADP is not adjusting quickly enough to some of the stuff. So I'm going to be writing an article about that this week, and obviously updating rankings throughout the next week until week 1 kicks off.
And of course, how to attack default rankings at Yahoo and other sites, all updated ahead of your draft weekend. We will be back with one more bonus episode to get you ready with our rankings changes and final draft thoughts Thursday. Subscribe to the feed, the most accurate podcast. But until then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.